Welcome back to the Matchbook Champions League podcast. Hard to believe it's the final round of group stage matches. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey, joined by Mark O'Haire and Miguel Delaney. Adrian Clark taking a well-earned break, but rest assured he will be back on Thursday. It was a busy domestic weekend, but we will get straight into Champions League action. Just before we start, if you are watching on the YouTube stream, either live or back, do hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds and helps us get our content out to a wider audience. But yeah, there's so much to talk about. We'll get straight into it. Manchester United versus Bayern. We will start here. Manchester United are 2.82 favourites. Bayern 2.46. The draw is 4.1. The Asian handicap line sees Bayern laying a quarter goal head start at 2.16. The goal line is 3.5, and that's shaded towards the under at 167. So Miguel, I'm excited to get your take on Manchester United. We haven't had you on the podcast for a couple of weeks, so a lot's happened. Like if we were talking this time last week, it might be positive, and maybe this time next week it might be positive, but right now, after that Bournemouth defeat, it did feel a seismic moment. But on Ten Hag, I'll leave ownership aside. What's your take on him so far?
I mean, it's the endless Manchester United cycle, isn't it? But taken to more extreme forms. And I mean, the Bournemouth game was beyond. I mean, it really is remarkable how they can go from a result like they had against Chelsea and what actually felt like the first proper performance, first convincing performance since maybe February, to then what is probably the worst defeat so far. Just because of the way they were outdone by Bournemouth. I mean, all right, okay, fair enough. The 7-0 against Liverpool is up there. I mean, it's actually incredible in itself, isn't it, to think that in Ten Hag's quite short time, and while up until this season, I think people would have said there was relative progress last season, but even with last season, the number of seismic defeats he's had, it's like really bad batterings. And like the sort of moments think, oh, this can't get worse. And yet it does. Now, weirdly, despite this inconsistency, despite this back and forth, there is a kind of a situation of relative stability because they're highly unlikely to make any major decisions until Ineos come in. There would have to be, obviously, kind of they'd have to go through the owners and directors test, or and then even then, Ineos would seek to do a kind of assessment of what the club looks like, how it can work, how Ten Hag fits into that. And I mean, ideally, that would mean everything stays in place, and it stays in place for Ten Hag for some time. But of course, events can get out of control, as we've discussed in the podcast before. And this week has the feel of the sort of period where exactly that can happen. When you've got Bayern Munich, who obviously are true in the group, and even it's interesting the way that has turned against Manchester United, because, well, you would usually have felt that, oh, they're through, it should be a more forgiving game. Suddenly, Bayern have a massive point to prove after what happened at the weekend.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the week, Liverpool, a resurgent Liverpool. Still not a completely convincing Liverpool in performance, but yeah, resurgent. So, I mean, we say you always think it can't get worse. This can get worse.
Well, Mark, before we do the bets, I'll just briefly on Ten Hag, because you don't usually get a chance to talk about it without maybe a betting point of view. But where I kind of see where Ten Hag, I think he manages, or at least tries to manage the players in the right way, tries to manage the media in the right way, tries to manage the owners in the right way. But I think ultimately, if you look at that style of football, I know it's probably not the biggest problem at United right now, as the Neville brothers would tell you. But if you look at the style of play, I'm struggling to feel or think what they actually do on the ball during a game. And I think the Bournemouth game was a perfect example. They couldn't pass out from the back. They should have gone long. Bournemouth sort of set them up in traps, and then they got that opening goal. The game was over.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big issue, isn't it? He came across from Ajax, and we were given this brief that he has a certain philosophy and wants to play a certain way, but we've not seen that consistently. And more often than not, this season at least, there's been question marks over the style of play. You know, what are they trying to actually achieve here? Too often they've looked rudderless, particularly in midfield. That's been an age-old issue, which was fixed for a certain while Casemiro played some brilliant football last season. But, you know, for a lot of this season, it's been a shambles. Defensively, they look too easy to play against. And I thought what was quite interesting at the weekend was actually listening to Andoni Iraola after the game, because his post-match comments basically explained how and where Bournemouth beat Man United and where they felt they could get an advantage against them. And he was quite explicit about that, really. And, I think we've seen it ourselves, really, that United are dreadfully vulnerable in transitions, in counter-attacks, and that proved the case against Bournemouth because they, when they turned the ball over, particularly down the flanks, they had players high up the field and were able to exploit the space. But it was similar against Chelsea. We rightfully praised them for their performance, which was the best, I think, of the season from a United perspective, and they deserved to win that game. But they gave up opportunities in that game, big opportunities. If you look at Opta and their classification of a big chance, which is where a player is reasonably expected to score, Opta gave Chelsea 5 big chances in that match. The XG value was over 1.5. So whilst Chelsea were totally blown away over the 90 minutes, they could easily have scored a couple of goals in counterattacks and transitions, and they were just wasteful on the night, really. But it's hard to work out where United have really gone wrong because, whilst the underlying metrics suggest they overachieved last season to actually get a trophy, to reach the FA Cup final, and to secure top 4, it was a successful first season for Erik ten Hag, beyond my expectations. And you expected them to kick on, but that's just not been the case. And now we're being talked about and briefed about how the club needs a complete revamp from top to bottom yet again. Where does this end, really? And I think we've talked off air previously about, if you were given the keys to Old Trafford and given unlimited riches, like what do you need to do to turn United around? And it's not a quick fix. There's an enormous amount of work that needs to get done there. And Ten Hag might be part of the problem, but I don't think he's the biggest problem.
Okay, yeah, Miguel, let's move on to the game itself. And look, this could have the makings of a big night in Old Trafford one way or the other if they do somehow pull off. And we'll get to the Copenhagen Galatasaray game after this one. But United versus Bayern, you touched on Bayern's proving a point after their 5-1 defeat, which would have shocked a lot of Europe, to be fair. But yeah, what are you looking at in terms of a bet here?
I mean, it does feel like I was supposed to say the one thing you can say with certainty, it's hard not to lean towards a Bayern win generally, given the form of the group, given the form of the season, despite what happened at the weekend. But beyond that, you're probably thinking goals, given the way the first game went, given United's general approach in Europe, which has been, this has been another thing that's been hard. Mark touched on it there about how Ten Hag doesn't seem to know his system, which I think is an absolutely major issue. But it's not just that he doesn't seem to know his system. It's that he seems to where you would think, say, Europe might be where he'd play more controlled football. Instead, Europe has been where they've been much more open. And it's led to these chaotic games. I've been to most of them, particularly the Copenhagen one. And it's just, and given Bayern's firepower, given that Bayern themselves it still feels like if they are to have a realistic chance of the Champions League this season, they need to get the midfielder that they did want in the summer window. And I think that we know Tuchel was a little bit irritated about not getting. So that is the rest. And let's not forget that, of course, the way these sort of nights go, where it's not quite a playoff because Bayern are through, but when the qualification on the line, and this is something we'll discuss with some of the later games earlier, or sorry, with some of the other games later on, that very kind of exacting situation where it pretty much is do or die, that makes games more open. So I think this could get really. I think this is a game where the justification is not to be conservative, and even by my own standards. I do actually have a score in mind, which will come to later. Yeah. But for the moment, I think this. I think it's fair enough to go over 3.5.
Okay, yeah, we won't spoil that.
That's what 3.5. That would be a 3-1, a 2-0.
Maybe a 3-2.
We've only had one game between these two that's gone beyond that.
We will we'll lock that in over 3.5 goals for Miguel. Mark, take it away on some of your thoughts here. It's sometimes you get to a game and you tell us not sure on a bet here, and you're honest with the listeners. But I think this one you have a couple of interesting angles pro Bayern Munich.
Too many interesting angles, I think, is the issue for me this time around.
If you've too many interesting angles, Mark, you've none, I guess. That's what they usually say.
Yeah. So there's been a bit of shuffling about to try and find what I feel is possibly the best value angle. So I think the worst thing to happen for Manchester United coming into this match was was Bayern Munich getting spanked 5-1 by Eintracht Frankfurt at the weekend. Bayern don't normally need a second invitation to focus their minds in the Champions League. Their record in this competition in the group stage is astonishingly good. They're unbeaten in 39 group stage games. They've won 35 of those. The draw against Copenhagen in the Matchday 5 was the first time they'd failed to score in those 39. They've won 17 of 19 away unbeaten group stage games now as well. Just phenomenal figures. It just kind of proves, even though they're through, they normally continue to produce on the European stage. And I think obviously the manner of that defeat at the weekend will have, they've got a point to prove. They'll be itching to set the record straight. And I guess parallel to what Man City have in terms of a small squad, but lots of top quality players, Bayern Munich are very similar. They can't really afford to make widespread changes. And something Thomas Tuchel said at the weekend was, without playing in the Cup and having their domestic game postponed last weekend against Union, left them with a longer kind of run without a game, which they're not really accustomed to, bar the international breaks. So he feels they needed a match, or needed another match to kind of get up to speed, really. And they're playing Stuttgart at the weekend, which is a big game in the Bundesliga. So I expect him to go strong here, feeling the need to get those players, get some more minutes into those legs, and get a response really from his players. And the way in which United are defending stylistically, the fact that they have to go for this game to win it, to have any chance of qualifying, should in theory play into Bayern's hands as well. So over 2.5 and BTTS felt like a no-brainer bet. We saw the Matchday 1 meeting end 4-3. Bayern didn't even get out of first gear in that game, yet still generated over 3 expected goals and scored 4 times. The way in which United have defended all season, especially at Old Trafford, and in which the fact they have to go for this match too should play into Bayern's hands in counterattacks and transitions. But ultimately, you don't really want to trust Bayern Munich keeping a clean sheet either, because they haven't been fantastic defensively too. So I've got 2 angles really. Bayern to score at least twice, Bayern to score over 1.5 goals. That's evens or around that mark. 6 of 13 visitors to Old Trafford this season have scored at least twice. Brighton, City, Newcastle, Bournemouth, Forest and Galatasaray. Chelsea possibly should have scored twice last midweek. So if those clubs can, no reason why Bayern can't. But the bigger price bet, Bayern to win and both teams to score at 4.0. I'm looking right now live on the site. It's 4.5, which is a lovely price. If Bayern are to win, it's probably unlikely they keep a clean sheet, because they rarely do so far this season. So I really like the look of that price. Just another sort of damning stat on United. They've conceded the second most goals in the competition this season, 14. Antwerp have conceded 15. No Premier League side has ever conceded 15 goals or more in a group stage Champions League campaign. That record will definitely be broken this midweek. Bayern will score, and I'm going to back them to win and BTTS.
Okay, yeah, that 4.5 is compared to 3.75 best price on the odds checker grid. So well worth taking there. I doubt it will last too long, to be fair, but it's 4.5 currently on the Match with Betting Exchange. And we will lock that in as a fun bet to support in this game. But there's a couple of long shots from Mark and Miguel later in the show on this game. We will go to Copenhagen versus Galatasaray and take a look at the betting firstly that we have on the Match with Betting Exchange. Copenhagen, 2.86, Galatasaray 2.5 favorites. The draw is available at 3.95. Both teams to score in a theme of the season. 1.59 is yes. The Asian handicap line is a drawn up bet market with Galatasaray favorites at 186, and the goal line is 2.5, but overs are 1.65. So Mark, we will stick with you on this one. It gives us a chance just to bring up the group here at the moment. So Bayern are obviously through on 13. Both these teams are on 5 points. We United on 4, but a draw from Copenhagen should get it done as long as Manchester United win. But there's a couple of permutations that might affect either game as we go on later in the game.
Yeah, there is. Basically, if Copenhagen avoid defeat here, they're in a great chance of qualifying, unless you think Man United will beat Bayern Munich, which is not out of the question. But it will obviously have a bearing on this group, and permutations will apply at certain points in the match on Tuesday night. But I've been really impressed with FC Copenhagen in the Champions League. They had to come through 3 stages of qualifying. When I saw the groups originally, I thought they were probably the most likely to finish bottom of this group in a scrap with Galatasaray to do so. But they've been incredibly competitive throughout the campaign so far. This is a fascinating match, obviously. But yeah, if you go back to Matchday 1, long time ago, of course, but FC Copenhagen led 2-0 in Turkey and very, very good for the most part before a red card tipped the balance against them. It came in the 73rd minute. They were 2-0 up at that point, and Gala scored 2 goals in the final 10 minutes, including a penalty to scrape a point, really. So I don't think this is going to be easy for Galatasaray at all. A lot's been made of the atmosphere in Istanbul when Gala hosts Champions League matches. Well, I can tell you the Parken Stadium in Copenhagen will be rocking. It's as vociferous as most stadiums across Europe. It's quite a tight, compact stadium, generates a great atmosphere. This will be intimidating for Gala. And while Copenhagen, I know the game against United stands out. It was another crazy game. They weren't at their best at all before the red card for Rashford. But their head coach kind of said as much, was adamant that it was their worst performance of the season. And I've been just really impressed with him, his tactical makeup of this team. And you just look at their performances in 2 games against Bayern Munich, really, really impressive. They lost 2-1 at home, but they gave the Germans a really tough time, did not deserve to lose on the balance of play. Then they earned a 0-0 draw in Munich. Like, no one ever nullifies Bayern to that extent in Munich. If you look at the XG they've conceded to Bayern over 2 legs, no one's ever managed to sort of silence Bayern in the way that FC Copenhagen have. So I think they're more than good enough to get something out of this game. Because I've been sceptical of Gala throughout the competition. I still maintain that scepticism. I still maintain that when the class is increased, they can look decidedly average in this level. I don't believe they're as strong as some people maintain they are. And there is a collection there of journeymen, but also players of kind of past prominence who are probably past their peak now. I know they've got individuals who are very classy, very capable on the day. They've got a collection of youngsters who are quite exciting, who should go on to bigger and better things too. But they are a mishmash of a squad, and I do think they can be exposed by smart, organised teams. They have conceded 2 goals or more in all of their group games. There's talk that Davinson Sanchez will be missing here. He is he is their best centre back, which kind of echoes my point really about them being quite they're just not accustomed to getting results on the road in the Champions League either. I know they've won at United, but that was their first win in 19 in this competition away from home. So with the hostile atmosphere, FCK just knowing how to set up for this kind of scenario, I'm going to back them with a quarter goal start. So as long as Galatasaray don't win, we make money, which I think is a very fair play. I'm surprised they're outsiders, so we can get them on side with that quarter goal start at 184.
Okay, half your money on drawn, about half your money on Copenhagen double chance. Miguel, your thoughts on that and your bet ultimately in this game?
No, it's very difficult to disagree with that. I suppose, again, it comes down to just the unique circumstances of these final day games. And that sort of chaos can engulf. So, I mean, I was actually very tempted to go similar to Mark because of how really outside that home game against Manchester United, Copenhagen's games have been quite tight. They're able to limit it. They're evidently very tactically astute and extremely controlled. But of course, I think the way this game goes, especially potentially news coming from somewhere else, I think that has to be a consideration, and that could potentially enliven this. Equally, with the way Galatasaray have played so far, and I think the very fact they have to come for it, I think that will further open this game out. I mean, Galatasaray themselves have been a chaotic team, but there are goals in it. So just because of how the night involves more than what it says, say, about Copenhagen, I'm just tempted to go for Galatasaray over 1.5. But that doesn't necessarily mean Copenhagen will get knocked out. I think they're there, as we saw against Manchester United, well capable of responding. But I just, it's one that comes out to me maybe a little bit different on the night. Because with a lot of these, actually, with the way it goes, it's almost tempting to go both teams to score through every game. In fact, maybe that's a suggestion in itself. Any game where there's something on the line, go both teams to score.
It's almost stating the obvious, but we know that goals change games anyhow. But on Matchday 6 of Champions League, when permutations are in play, it's even harder sometimes to get a read on things. My theory going into this game is, there should be goals for obvious reasons. But from a Copenhagen perspective, they kind of know that Galatasaray thrive on the chaos. That's kind of when they've been at their best, really. So why would they want to engage in that kind of a game when what they've done against the likes of Bayern Munich has worked so well? That was my theory, really, but I can just certainly see why people want to get with goals.
And as you say, it's when those goals go in. It's not just how it changes state, but it just changes the kind of the psychological makeup of a game. Creates that urgency that you don't see in other match days.
Yeah, it could be one to this could arguably be a better game than the United game if the permutations go that way and United don't get the results. So we'll lock in
tentative. So let's hope at least there's entertainment.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. There'll be entertainment there in one way or another.
Well, that's true.
It's just guaranteed. Any of the three results, really. We'll lock in a tentative selection for Copenhagen plus a quarter of a goal head start at 184. But maybe some of those goal angles and a couple of ACCAs in the games that matter on the matchup and exchange could be worth a fun one to watch. Matchday 6. Well, we've officially covered all 12 games of this group here, but we won't make no apologies for Newcastle versus Milan, the Napland. So well done for anyone who had the over 8.5 on that absolute cruise home. Newcastle 193 favourites at St. James's Park. We'll get to that. Milan 4.1. The draw is available at 4.0. Both teams to score, yes, 177, not as short as it can be in games in the Premier League or the Champions League. The Asian handicap line sees Milan get a half goal head started above even money 204. Goal line is 2.5. So Miguel, set this up. If we were talking a week ago, you would still say Eddie Howe's doing a great job, a bit unlucky in the Champions League. But a week's a long time. I would even say up to 77 minutes at Goodison Park, you would say the same. But those two Trippier errors that he had O'Haire himself at the weekend, but they had to start him here because he's suspended for the next Premier League game. Plus, they don't even have the players to come in. So it is an injury crisis that's really affected Eddie Howe's team. It's just taking its time to affect them.
Well, that's exactly it, and that influencing the last two games as well as what they have to do here. I mean, because it's not just they're beating Newcastle. To lose by 3 goals twice is striking. But it does speak to something we were talking about before the group began, and I think it influenced some of our picks on how this could go, which is that navigating a season with European football, let alone Champions League football, and an attempt to kind of get back into the Champions League. It's very difficult, especially when it's the first time in a few years, when the squad isn't necessarily constructed to that depth yet, which has clearly been the case. And suddenly it puts them quite abruptly in a very difficult position, given that even the last round of games, right up until the last minute or into stoppage time with that Mbappe penalty, it all looked so much more different. Now, the one thing I am thinking about this, I suppose, what was so remarkable about those two defeats of the last two games was, of course, how they quickly followed the win over Manchester United, which came in similar situations. Obviously, that 10 players that Howe keeps using weren't as fatigued at that point because it was 180 minutes less. But they were still feeling the effects of a lot of build-up of minutes. And it did feel as if maybe the emotional intensity of playing Manchester United, you only have to hear from fans. It doesn't mean a lot to Newcastle fans, especially going back to, those title races in the 90s, particularly 95, 96. So there's that edge to it. And I think that brought out a level of performance. Now, the wonder here, I suppose, is for all the issues that Newcastle have had in the last two games and really issues that have been building, whether just the fact that it's a home game, it's a club like Milan, and they have to win to get through, almost certainly have to win to get through, whether that just brings out a similar performance to the Manchester United game in the way that can happen. The circumstances can just, no matter the physical condition of a team, the emotional intensity of the game can bring out something more. And I'd say actually why it's crucial that Newcastle get the first goal, and maybe get an early goal, maybe to perpetuate momentum, and also to allow them to set the game plan. Because I think just in terms of that, Howe is one of the best managers in Europe at the moment, I'd say, in terms of using game states and how, a lot of their games recently, I think even the Manchester United one, there's been a 50-50 element to them. But then when Newcastle get ahead, they know how to use it. Again, fatigue and the circumstances of the night could affect that. And just because of that, and because of how Newcastle are almost dependent on getting that early goal, I think this could develop into another one that goes back and forth. Just with the way Newcastle have been conceding as well, with the impetus on them. And so I'm going to go over 2.5. Or sorry, I'm just going to marks there for a second, actually. Sorry to give it away.
Yeah, spoilers. Spoilers.
Both teams to score. But on reflection, actually, on that price, I'd actually agree with Mark. Over 2.5 and both teams to score. because I think it's obviously set up for that. And let's not forget, on the other side, I've fixated too much on Newcastle, but Milan have a chance here. And in Milan, they lost 3-2 to Atalanta the weekend, an amazing goal in that game from Muriel. There had been maybe signs of a bit of a resurgence. They do have some kind of breathing space, some life in Europe. I think this is set up for another of those back and forths that we're talking about today.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating. Just to mention the group: Dortmund 10 points, PSG 7. These two teams on 5, so must win for both to have any chance of qualifying. Need a favourite from Dortmund, which we'll get to. Mark, take it away with your bet as best you can without spoiling it to the end.
Yeah, I found it reasonably difficult. I can't trust either team and the main prices or the handicaps. Both teams obviously reliant on results elsewhere. I think from a Milan perspective, it's a tall order. They need to win here and hope PSG lose. And Dortmund obviously already qualified, but they're playing for top spots. But understandable if they're not 100% at it. A bit more achievable for Newcastle. They win and PSG fails to win in Dortmund, and they're through because of the positive head-to-head record there. So the question is, how much do they have left in the tank? After those two kind of chastening performances away in the Premier League last week, you'd suggest possibly not much. But did they have an eye on this match on Sunday? I don't think so, in all honesty, but that's certainly been a line that's been attributed to that poor performance. The reason why I say probably not is just that Eddie Howe didn't take off most of his frontline players until well after the hour mark. I think it was 67 minutes and 73 minutes or around that mark, really, when the game was more or less done and dusted before then. So I would have thought he would have made changes, even if it was bringing on kids with this match in mind earlier. But the big positive from a Newcastle perspective is obviously this game is at St James's Park, where more often than not, they have managed to raise themselves, produced a very strong and memorable performance. I know Dortmund nullified them here, but it's going to be a big ask for Milan to repeat that feat and replicate that performance for 90 minutes, especially when they're going to have to be front foot themselves. So clearly, both are dependent on what happens elsewhere, which does kind of make it quite difficult to have a really strong pre-match view, considering if PSG were 2-3 goals ahead at half time, news will filter through and probably a bit of despondency around the ground. But I think Newcastle will put in a strong performance. They do tend to, beating United and Chelsea convincingly. They were going through the same selection problems back then, the same fatigue problems, but they managed to raise themselves. And it's almost like a last stand opportunity for them. So I think they will kind of empty the tank and put everything out there. And St James's Park, the crowd will certainly whip up a frenzy too. So expecting goals. Clearly, Matchday 1, Milan were miles better than Newcastle, took 25 shots without success. But they'll be encouraged by team news. Clearly, Newcastle struggling. No Nick Pope, who was the saviour back then. And Dubravka, who is a solid goalkeeper, hasn't looked solid since he's come back into the team. Made a couple of errors, and that would be a concern from a Magpies perspective. But positive for Milan, Rafael Leao should be fit, available and playing, which is a big boost. They are the lowest scorers in the group stage. Just scored 3 goals, but their XG comes in at 7.9. So they've actually been the most wasteful throughout the group stage too. So they are creating chances. They've just not been putting them away until the last couple of matches. So if you look at their last 6 league games, 4 of 6 have seen over 2.5 and BTTS, including away days at Atalanta and Napoli in that sequence too. So they do know where the back of the net is, but defensively they can be exposed too. So I think 12 of 16 Matchday 6 games last year went over 2.5 goals. I think this has got the recipe to follow that pattern. And as Miguel says, you expect both teams to oblige, considering the situation too. But I would just be slightly wary, betting heavily pre-match, knowing that what happens elsewhere could easily have a big bearing on things. As I say, the worry is PSG running into an early lead and sort of convincingly beating Dortmund away. But as unlikely as that might be, it's just something to bear in mind.
Okay, yeah, we will lock in. We'll lock in the 2.15 just to boost the odds a little bit. But Miguel with the safer option there, both teams to score. 177 does bring in the 1-1 if needs be, but we will get to elsewhere right now. We will get to Borussia Dortmund versus Paris Saint-Germain and take a look at the betting that we currently have on Matchbook.com. Dortmund top of the group, as we touched on, 4.0 here. Don't really need to win anyway. 192 for PSG. The draw is available at 4.2. Both teams to score, yes, 165 currently with no available at 246. The Asian handicap line sees Dortmund get a half a goal start at 2.06, double chance there, and over 2.5 goals is 165. So, Mark, we'll stick with you. Slight disagreement. You guys are coming at it from two different angles. Dortmund don't need a result here. So, where's the motivation for them to A, put out a really good team, and B, get a result here against PSG?
Good question. If I was finding loads of possible angles at Bayern against United, I found this one very, very difficult. Dortmund have qualified, as you say, but I think a club of their stature in the modern game, winning the group and avoiding some of Europe's big guns is a big enough incentive really to give this a proper look against PSG. And you don't really want to get thumped. They lost at Leipzig at home at the weekend, so they need to get a result. But I think to win the group is a carrot to really go for. But I can certainly understand why the market is heavily tiered towards PSG, not just because of the sort of superior individuals and budget, but because of the requirement to get a result. A draw doesn't guarantee PSG progress if Newcastle beat Milan. So the market is expecting a strong PSG display as their odds on, kind of understandable. But I think if Dortmund do turn up and play for the point or more, which will give them top spot, I think they can be competitive, and I think they can command a bit more respect in the market. I dismissed them as the worst team in the group before a ball was kicked. I still am dubious about their quality, but you can't deny their efforts in the Champions League, which have been way above my own expectations. The way in which they nullified Newcastle on Matchday 3 and 4 was remarkable, especially considering it came after the kind of no-show against PSG on the opening night, and then were pretty much second best at home to Milan in a 0-0 draw. But I think winning and the manner of it in Milan was, again, very, very impressive. They're back in Dortmund here, where they've conceded just one Champions League goal in the last 7, which, again, is just really surprising for a side we associate with being quite kamikaze defensively. So I think they can make this life tough and difficult for PSG, who every time I think they're making moves in the right direction under Luis Enrique, they turn in a wobbly, or he selects a really odd team, as he has done now on 2 or 3 occasions in this competition, tactically just been exposed at times. And yeah, they probably did do more than enough to beat Newcastle in Paris last time out, but you find them much more trustworthy in Paris, but far from it when they're on their travels. They've already lost in Milan, lost in Newcastle. They're without a Champions League clean sheet away from home in 15 now. That goes all the way back to October 2020 against Istanbul Başakşehir. So, Dortmund can score here, and then suddenly PSG need 2 to, just to guarantee themselves a place in the last 16. So I kind of just talked myself into backing Dortmund with a 3/4 goal start. Basically means we only lose half of our stake if PSG win this game by exactly 1 goal. But if BVB avoid defeat, you get paid out at that price. But yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. I'm happy to leave this one alone from the 4 we're talking about, but that would be my preferred play.
Okay, plus 3/4 of a goal. That's half your stake on plus half a goal, and half your stake on plus 1.0 for Dortmund. But Miguel, for what it's worth, I do sort of like this angle. Just this price is pretty big to me. But yeah, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of it, but also, and I know this goes against everything I've said in terms of the night, and also a lot of PSG's form, but I just have a slight gut feeling on this, especially given Dortmund are through. And I take Mark's point that they want to finish top. They've also got a bit of a point to prove from the weekend. But that's still the very fact that it's not qualification line, I think, takes something away. PSG have a greater urgency. And I just have a feeling that PSG will put in one of those sort of more controlled displays that actually gets the job done. Because I think Dortmund are also one of those teams as well, that are at least more easy to tactically prepare for. The issue with Dortmund becomes about, I suppose, how on it they are, because I think that can bring a huge variation in the application of their own tactics. And if they're not on it, I think they're very easy to play against. And it's why I think that feeds into, I mean, my temptation is almost to go PSG with a 1-0 or a 2-0. But yeah, I'm going to go PSG to win and both teams to score. No, I think for all at these nights as well, can be set up for these kind of chaotic matches. There are also, they're usually characterized well by 1 or 2 that are just kind of those classic European displays where a team just gets the job done. And because of the situation of Dortmund side, as much as the PSG side. I think this will be that.
Yeah, it seems a bit of a boost. 192 PSG to win, but pair it with Dortmund not to score. Both teams to score no, 3.9. We will lock that in as a tentative selection for Dortmund versus PSG. A full recap of all four of those bets, plus the bets coming up, available on insights.matchbook.com. Just search Matchbook Insights in your Google search. Any other bets? Miguel, we'll go to you on this because Mark is in agreement with this, and we'll bring Mark in then for any final thoughts on it. But yeah, Napoli versus Braga. Napoli, a team we talked about a lot last season. It seems they're almost a forgotten child, but they take on Braga at home there with, they can't afford to lose this game.
Yeah, I mean, this should be true, but there is a risk. It's one of the only other two games, as well as Porto and Shakhtar, where there's something on the line. Porto Shakhtar actually a bit. I found it a lot more difficult to read. I mean, I was thinking about that as kind of potential any other bet, but nothing really screamed out at me, to be honest. And that could be a game to watch for precisely that reason, if not necessarily one to think about into a bar, maybe both teams to score, which is actually precisely what I'm going for here. I complemented by over 2.5 because, again, I think the circumstances just to set that up, as does Napoli's form this season, where look, it's just not the same team as last year. It's something that happens, especially after the emotion of winning a title race in that way, the manager change, just a different dynamic around the team. And they're easier to get at, but there are obviously still goals. And it's just something there. Unlike, say, anything in the Shakhtar Porto game, that just screams out. I think there'll be goals and both teams will score.
Okay, yeah, Mark, take it away with any final thoughts on that bet and then lead us into Lens versus Seville, which is an interesting angle there considering the price too.
Yeah, Napoli are far too short, I thought, in this game. They're sub 1.5 to beat Braga, which I think is disrespectful to Braga, who played their part in a really enjoyable game against Napoli on Matchday 1. They lost it 2-1 in Portugal, but they definitely deserved something from that match. And Braga are a team who are just wonderful to watch. They go into games believing they can score, believing they can win, believing almost Kevin Keegan-like with Newcastle back in the day, just embracing the chaos, really. And I think they'll bring that noise to the Maradona Stadium. If you look at their raw numbers so far this season, 24 games across all competitions, 20 have seen both teams score, and 18 have gone over 2.5 goals. The only game Braga have failed to score in this season was on Matchday 5 away at Real Madrid, where they missed a penalty inside the first 15 minutes. So they know where the back of the net is ordinarily. If you look at the underlying metrics, they've been creating tons of opportunities throughout this campaign, despite being in a group of Real, Napoli and Union, the stodgy Union side. Their shots in the box numbers, their XG numbers are very, very strong. And Napoli, yeah, there's probably crisis of identity at the moment over there right now. They're struggling to keep clean sheets. Their home form is very poor. They've been giving opportunities away. But on the flip side, Victor Osimhen is fit, and Kvaratskhelia has been showing signs of life again after what's been a quiet season by his standards too. So if you look at Braga, they have actually conceded twice or more in 4 of their 5 group games. So, combine it all, consider what's at play here. It's an open match where both teams have the opportunity to qualify still, and I think goals will be on the agenda. And then, Lens against Sevilla. Group B looks done and dusted. This is effectively a Europa League playoff. Sevilla need to win in Lens to play Europa League football, the competition they crave, they love, they relish. But for Lens, I think they still definitely want to play in Europe this season. It's been a while since they've been on this stage, so they'll be quite happy to play Europa League football after the new year. I am quite keen on Lens here, basically because of Sevilla's injuries and suspension issues coming into this match. I'll read the list of players who are missing. Suso, João Jorjan, Luca Bacchio, Mariano Diaz, Nyland, Nianzou, Navas, Lamela, Acuna, Balde, Campos, Marcao, Januzaj. A lot of players missing, but they will still be able to field a competitive 11, actually. And they have been very much involved in goal-heavy games throughout the campaign. BTTS in 4 or 5 Champions League games. In 11 of 15 La Liga games, it should have been 12 from 15 at the weekend. The only game they've not really kind of come to the party was that away trip at the Emirates Stadium, where they fielded a second-string team and effectively threw the match because they were playing the derby at the weekend against Betis, which took precedence. So yeah, I think they will turn up to the game with an intention to try and win it, obviously, to keep their Europa League dreams alive. But I think Lens can fight fire with fire. Lens haven't been keeping regularly clean sheets at home this season, but they tend to be very strong and formidable in front of the home fans too. So at a similar price to Lens to win it, I thought over 2.5 goals at odds against was perhaps the play here. BTTS a runner too, but just because of Sevilla's injury issues, I prefer overs just in case Lens were to run out this game. Comfortable winners, but yeah, over 2.5 goals is 2.04.
2.04 over 2.5 goals. Lens versus Seville and Napoli versus Braga over 2.5, and both teams will score combined in and around 2.15. Best long shots here. Miguel, we won't spend too long on this because we covered it, but this is you tried your best not to give it away, and you didn't mention the score. I might have mentioned it. So yeah, look, this is a big price to be fair to you. So take it away. Sell us the dream.
Well, I would have gone 5-3 to Bayern, but maybe that's a little bit, even for this group this season. That's maybe a little bit on the fringes. So I'm going to go 3-2 to Bayern at 25, which would of course spell the end of United's campaign, which actually feels maybe that's not such a long shot. No,
not at all. But Mark, under similar lines, but look, that's the correct score market. Miguel's is priced around 25.0. Up to 4 goals, the exchange markets, matchup betting exchange markets sort of piles them into a little bit of a, you get a lot of correct scores on side. So explain that to the listeners and then take it away with your bet.
Yeah, we've done it a couple of times now this season, which is to attack the any other win option on the correct score, which basically means you need your side to score at least 4 goals and win the game. So, 4-1, 4-2, 5-2, 6-0, 7-0, 8-1, whatever you want, really. As long as they score 4 goals and win the game, you get paid out. And it's 11.0 for Bayern Munich away at Manchester United, whose hopes of progressing are already pretty slim. But I think the 5-1 defeat for Bayern Munich at the weekend is possibly the worst thing to happen in terms of preparation for this game. I do expect Bayern to go strong, not just because of that defeat, but because of what Tuchel said about getting his players back into a rhythm. The likes of Kane, Leroy Sané have been in exceptional form, home and abroad so far this season, and they'll have seen what Bournemouth and Chelsea have done in terms of counterattacks and transitions, and I think that would really suit Bayern Munich here, considering United need to come out fighting. So I think they will get spaces to exploit, and in those two players, you've probably got 2 of the best players on the planet right now in terms of taking opportunities, creating and causing problems to opposition sides. So this could get ugly. This could disintegrate for United quite quickly, and Bayern tend to be pretty ruthless in these situations. So they need a performance to kind of silence the critics. Tuchel is feeling the pressure. He's already been knocked out of the DFB Pokal by a 3rd-tier side, and then to suffer a 5-1 defeat is not good. So, yeah, Bayern should come out fighting.
Yeah, 11.0. He's feeling the heat from the likes of Didi Hamann, who aren't impressed with Thomas Tuchel. Miguel, that will cover your 5-3. Any other way win? It's big.
He doesn't count.
Didi doesn't count. No. Didi's
There's going to be goals here. I mean, it would just be a massive rise, and it just feels so safe in that sense. With the two teams, with how United's games have gone, with the context of the night.
Yeah, so go on, take it away. Your best bet, which is over 3.5 goals.
Over 3.5. Yeah, I think it's going to. I mean, and that covers obviously anything other than a low-scoring game, really. But like 2-2. I mean, a heavy Bayern win as well, which actually, I think there's some capacity for that. Maybe just given what we saw on Saturday, there is a bit of danger for real humiliation here for United, actually. But then I suppose we wouldn't have said that about Bayern on Saturday either.
Yeah, no, fascinating game, but that over 3.5 does cover. And Mark, to complete the 4 out of 4 on this game for best long shots and best bets. But if you were to have one bet, the safest bet for you on the card for this game anyway, or for the week anyway, what would it be? Come in again, Mark.
Whoops, sorry, I was muted. I think Bayern Munich to score at least twice does really appeal at even money, a terrific price considering it's occurred in 6 of 13 Old Trafford games already this season. And you look at the calibre of opposition to do so, and Bayern will be up there with the best of them. Man City scored 3 at a canter here not so long ago. Bayern possess the superior firepower. It's just a clinical nature about them, a need to bounce back at the weekend. There should be open spaces, and I'm hopeful this game descends into a bit of a basketball-style game with United chasing the match with qualification on the line, and we might see something similar to what we saw in the reverse match back on Matchday 1, where Bayern scored 4 goals and did not get out of second gear.
Okay, we will lock in those best bets and best long shots, all coming down to Manchester United versus Bayern. So we will see how we get on come 10 o'clock on Tuesday. It could be a long week otherwise, but joking aside, my thanks to Mark O'Haire and Miguel Delaney. Mark will be returned with Adrian Clark to preview a bumper weekend football card. Had a quick look at it. Could be the highest rated Super Sunday of the season, but to find that out, stay tuned and look into our YouTube channel for when we go live on Thursday. But until then, enjoy the Champions League football. If you are having a bet on the Matchbook Betting Exchange, enjoy, but please do so responsibly, and we will chat to you on Thursday. Bye-bye.